Good afternoon and welcome to the seminar on Sri Lanka's historic underwater mysteries. Today, we hope to explore hidden treasures in Sri Lankan waters. My name is Tony Pradeep Kumara. I'm an ecologist and academic. So today I am your host moderator. So Sri Lanka is straddling in North Indian Ocean waters in extremely strategic location with its exclusive economic zone. The size of the country is about the sea is about more than 500,000 square kilometers. The depth goes to 3,500 meters. In the vast ocean, unknown is known. We know more about Mars than our own ocean. So our ocean treasures most of our future. The future we expect through blue economy. So our future economy is based on the ocean, an oceanic blue economy. So ocean tourism plays a pivotal role in ocean economy. Cruises, leisure, water sports, adventure, nature, and cultural aspects are some of them. So expedition into shipwrecks has a long history dated several decades. Mysteries are there. On the top of that, it says stories about our own history. It harbors colorful and diverse and dynamic marine diversity. So diving into these treasures is expeditious, thrilling, fun, educative, and exciting in each second. Don't worry, I am not going to talk about that today. But to talk about that, I have three very experienced Sri Lankan professionals that are joining with me today. They work with them. Not only that, they live with them. So today I am with Darshana Jayawardena, Amartya Vijayasuriya, and Nishan Pereira. Good afternoon, buddies.
Hi, good
Afternoon, Tony.
Hi, good
Good
afternoon.
afternoon. Yes. Good afternoon. Yes. So today's the session. I will take 10 minutes for them, so they will give their speeches within this 10 minutes time. After that, the sessions will be open for your questions. So if you have any questions, please feel free to drop into our chat box. So let's start with our first speaker, Darshana. Darshana Jayawardena is an underwater explorer and author of The Ghost of the Deep, diving the shipwrecks of Sri Lanka. So I always recommend you to read that book. He discovered Sri Lanka's first underwater cave system, and he solved number of mysteries they lied in our waters, including the two World War One vessels. Actually, he found them and he explored them, and a World War II aircraft that was lost for years, and he found them in 2019. So he was recognized as the edX Asian Explorer of the Year. With much appreciation, let me welcome Darshana. Darshana, so let me start with this question. So tell us, what is shipwreck diving and how can Sri Lanka be compared with other Asian countries such as Maldives, Malaysia, Indonesia, and in India for shipwrecks? I need some comparative brief about shipwreck diving in our region. Darshan.
Right. It's a great question, Tony. So I think just to give a background, there are about 25 million estimated scuba divers in the world, and these are basically recreational divers. So these are divers. It's not their profession. They just want to explore the ocean and they want to go in the ocean and they want to see what's there, right? Because it's a really exciting thing to do. So when you are exploring the ocean, you can either explore reefs or something else. And there are so many other things in the ocean. So when it comes to shipwrecks, obviously ships that sink, and I think in Sri Lanka, when you say shipwrecks, it has got such a bad name with the case of Express Pearl, for example, that people think that shipwrecks are really polluting, ugly things that are on the surface. But that's not the case. I mean, yes, when a shipwreck sinks, there is a certain amount of pollution. But for hundreds of years, for decades, we have shipwrecks that have been sunk in the ocean, and they have turned into artificial reefs. So these 25 million divers, they explore all over the world. And the reason they like shipwrecks is when you dive a reef, you can see marine life, right? You can see fish and you can see beautiful corals. But when you dive a shipwreck, in addition to seeing marine life and corals, you also get a sense of mystery, like history. It's kind of it's a feeling that I can't really describe, but you have to go in and you have to actually get it yourself. So when you dive a shipwreck, you have this additional excitement. You are going into history. You are traveling. You are time traveling. You are going back in time to a incident that happened a long time ago. And then when you are diving the shipwreck, if you know what the incident is, you can actually see it happen while you are diving in your mind. So the reason that people like to do shipwreck diving is really one of the most exciting forms of diving. And in Sri Lanka, we have identified over 100 shipwrecks. We have identified and documented over 100 shipwrecks, and around 50 to 60 of them are actually really great for divers to go and explore. And you asked me about how do we compare with South Asian countries? So I have dived in Maldives, Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines, Thailand, and I can say, and obviously someone can say I'm biased because I'm Sri Lankan, but any day when it comes to Rex, I will pick diving in Sri Lanka. We have so much options all around the island for me to dive. So that's one of the reasons I think we can call ourselves the wreck capital of South Asia.
So Hashim, these pictures must be from you, right? You have taken these pictures during your dive operations, right?
That's right, yes.
Super. So Darshana, so why our reefs are so unique? So can you just briefly tell us about why our Sri Lankan wrecks are a bit unique than other wrecks you mentioned?
Yes. So if you can load the pictures Q2001, there's a map that you can see. And Tony, before I answer that question, let me just talk about the I think the depths and the range, and then get into that question. So you can see now this is actually the work of the National Shipwreck Database. We have documented over 100 shipwrecks and geolocated them in a map. So you can see that all around Sri Lanka we have wrecks, and if you think about the depth range, okay, now people can ask you how deep are these wrecks. It can vary from 0 to about 70 meters. So the deepest wreck we have identified is around 70 meters, right? So anyone who does a dive training in Sri Lanka, 3 to 4 days of training, can access wrecks up to about 18 meters of depth. And if you do a little bit more, have a little bit more experience, up to 30 meters. And it is in this range that you have the best wrecks in Sri Lanka. So for example, if you look at this map, you can see that there are shipwrecks around Galle and historical wrecks. I think Amartya will talk about that. In the Galle Harbour itself, we have historical wrecks. Then in the East Coast, Batticaloa, that area, we have World War wrecks. And actually, one of the biggest surprises, I think now people know this secret a little bit more, is that Colombo is one of the best places to dive shipwrecks. There are such a concentration of shipwrecks because of the harbour that is there from, I think, the earliest shipwreck I have explored is in the 1800s to shipwreck that's really modern. So if you could actually show the picture Q2005, I would like to just talk about that shipwreck specifically. It's a modern shipwreck. Yeah, so this is the Thermopylae Sierra shipwreck. This sank in 2012 or 13, and it's now transformed into artificial reef. The reason I brought this shipwreck up is because it's in Colombo, and because it's shallow, 0 to 23 meters, lots of people can dive it. Right? It's easy to dive. It's a really great training ground. So it's actually very fun shipwreck to dive. So to sum it up, I would say that there are shipwrecks from 0 to 70 meters, and it's spread all over Sri Lanka. In addition, Sri Lanka has 2 seasons, right? So you have the West Coast season from April to about October, and the East Coast season from October to April. So you can actually dive all year. You got to travel around a little bit, but you can access shipwrecks all year. Tony, can I go to the question that you asked about the significant wrecks?
Yes,
And
Darshana, please go ahead.
so if I am to touch about that, I think you asked, okay, what are the significant shipwrecks? So if you could show the pictures Q300, 000. Yeah. So I think one reason that Sri Lanka kind of stands apart away from the other South Asian countries is that we have quite a number of war wrecks, right? We have World War I wrecks and World War II wrecks. Actually, Sri Lanka is famous. It's always in the top 100 or top 10 list. HMS Hermes, the world's first purpose-designed aircraft carrier, and it sank off particularly during 1942. And Sri Lanka is famous with. There are tech divers. This is a little bit of a deep wreck. It's at about 53 meters, but hundreds of experienced divers already come to Sri Lanka to dive this because it's such a great experience. And actually now you can start showing the other pictures on Q3 so that you can, I think everyone can get a sense of what sort of experience that we can get in these shipwrecks. So this is, I'm showing pictures of Hermes. And so in this World War II fleet, which was the British Eastern Fleet, we have about 5 shipwrecks, all the way from Trinco to Oluville. And these provide for amazing World War wreck experience. And the Hermes is also special that it's only 1 in 3 diveable aircraft carriers in the world. And the only aircraft carrier that sank in battle. All the other 2 aircraft carriers that anyone can dive in the world, they were artificially sunk, right? So this makes this much more special. There's so much history. 307 people died when this shipwreck sank, when the ship sank. And in addition, there was a British tanker that sank, a World War II destroyer. So the East Coast is, we could say, World War II wrecks. Then on the West Coast, you find 2 World War I wrecks that were sunk because of the German commerce trader SMS Wolf, which laid sea mines off the coast of Colombo. I think we hardly talk about World War I, right? So it's really interesting to see that there is a World War I influence, and a very few shipwrecks in Asia on World War I can be found. The 2 can be found in Sri Lanka. So I hope, Tony, that I answered your question. If there's anything, let me know.
Yes, Darshana. So I have one additional question. All of these shipwrecks are, those are natural shipwrecks I can mention. But do you have any artificial wrecks in Sri Lankan waters? Just for my curiosity.
Yes, indeed. So I think so many countries, they spend an enormous amount of money cleaning up old shipwrecks and actually sinking them. So a lot of people in Sri Lanka are amazed when we say that we are cleaning up shipwrecks for pollutants and we are actually sinking the ship. So why not break these, and sell it for metal? That's what most people in Sri Lanka say. But fortunately in Sri Lanka, we have now a couple of shipwrecks that were artificially sunk. In Negombo, we have the VIP car wreck, which is an old ship full of VIP cars that were used by our past presidents, and it's off Negombo. And if you are even a junior diver, you can actually explore it. It's about at the depth of about 25 meters. And then recently, the Navy also sank 2 warships, decommissioned warships of Trincomalee in Sandy Bay. So again, in depths that anyone can access, and it's a very clear water, beautiful shipwrecks. So those are the artificially sunk shipwrecks in Sri Lanka, as far as I know.
Thank you, buddy. So I have only 3 questions at this moment for you because I have to move to my next presenter, right? It's Amalka. So Amalka Vijayasuri is my next presenter. So Amalka is a lecturer at the moment at Department of History and Archaeology at University of Ruhuna. At the same time, he used to work at Department of Archaeology as an archaeological research officer for more than 12 years. So Amalka holds BA in Archaeology from University of Ruhuna and postgraduate diploma in Archaeology in PGIA. At the same time, he's having a master's degree in Archaeology from Deccan Postgraduate and Research Institute of Pune, India. Further, He's a Fulbright Professional Scholar Award to the University of Wisconsin, USA. And he's a professional field in archaeologist and professional underwater archaeologist as well with diving experience currently engaging with number of leading ongoing underwater archaeology projects in the country, including some archaeological impact assessments. So he is also specialized in areas of archaeological technique and methods, ancient uh, beads analysis, proto-historic archaeology, and both tangible and intangible heritage. He's a member of Sri Lanka Council of Archaeologists. At the same time, he's a founder member of the International Association for Asian Heritage and a member of many other national and international academic bodies. Welcome, Amanka.
Thank you, Dr.
Amanka,
Tony.
so my first question for you is that, so why we have such an old treasure while rest of the Indian Ocean doesn't have them in such numbers? Why Sri Lanka is having lots of shipwrecks? Can you briefly explain using connecting Sri Lanka into a historical perspective?
Yeah, Dr. Tony. First of all, thank you for introducing me with generosity. Thank you for that, and good afternoon, everyone. So, to answer into your first question, yes, if you can put the slides. Yeah, Sri Lanka has a. I have to talk about the location to answer your question. The location of Sri Lanka. In fact, it's a strategic location we have in Sri Lanka. So the location it's the center in Indian Ocean. In fact, so it has a historical significance. So in this slide, you can see how the monsoon patterns, the seasonal monsoon patterns comes throughout the Indian Ocean. And these days we are experiencing this summer monsoons. Though just after next month, it will start winter monsoons. So as you see here, this side, the southwest monsoon carrying when the seasons comes to the winter monsoons, it helps other sailers to sail from the other side, from the western side. So this strategic location always helped. Can you skip the slide? Helped sailers to travel from here and there, from west to east. In this slide, you'll see the Maritime Silk Road. So here also we can see behind the red color line, it shows you to show you the Maritime Silk Road. Behind the centermost position. Again, I'm emphasizing the importance of the location of our island, Sri Lanka. The Maritime Silk Route, as you know, it is not used only by traders. It's also used by travelers as well as state envoys and religious missionaries. And here you can see the Ptolemy's world map. He has given enormous the scale of Sri Lanka. You can see he named this as Thermopylae, and you can see the size of that. And not only him, number of travelers they have, and number of nations they have given different names to Sri Lanka: Thermopylae, Seremdeep, Ceylon, like that. So this shows you the importance of historical location, the strategic location I'm telling you. So because of that, to go to the next slide. Yeah, this kind of foreign materials we have been gaining from land archaeological excavation. This is from a site called megalithic burial site called Ibankatu near Dambulla. You can see these beads. These are carnelian beads. So we can't find these materials, raw materials from Sri Lanka. So it's exactly we can tell that these materials came from outside Sri Lanka. So next slide. This is from Tisamaharam excavation. It's a Roman coin. Like that, there are a number of foreign materials we have been revealing from land archaeological sites. So this shows you, and these golden ladies from Sigiriya. It says that this graffiti says that the golden ladies were wearing Chinese silk. And this is a good example that this is from Chinese literature. It's about a book of history of Guangzhou. Guangzhou is the centermost port site. Today we not known as Canton. There's the central one of the main port site of China in Maritime Silk Road. So a book on Guangzhou, it says that the biggest ship, the largest, biggest ship came to Guangzhou in 9th century AD, came from Lion Kingdom. They refer Lion Kingdom to Sri Lanka. So the Sri Lanka has the biggest, one of the biggest large ship came to Guangzhou at that time. So, and as we all know, the Zheng He is one of the captains, Chinese captains, came to Gaul during 15th century. And this is his map. Here you can see the green line and the yellow lines. This is Sri Lanka. So this map you Himachali and Dondra. So this is the map once I made regarding ancient port sites in Sri Lanka. You can see, if you can enlarge that map again, so you can see how many, there are a number of more than 25 ancient port sites we had. So because of that strategic location, there are a number of port sites we could reveal archaeologically and historically. So there are some excavations also have happened. In fact, I should say this Mantai in the north western side. You can go to the next slide. Mantai is the main port site. It's I should say it's a emporium. It's a port city, ancient port city of Anuradhapura period. So more than 15 from let's say about 6th century AD to 15th century, it is flourishing. It was flourishing as the main port site. These are some surface artifacts. These all artifacts are from locally made. These are foreign materials. The beads and the ceramics and bangles, they all belong to foreign countries, not from Sri Lanka. And coming to again after Mantai in southern part of Sri Lanka, we have Godaway. It's also one of the ancient port sites. In this mound, there's a temple Godaway temple. So you can shift the slide. And these are again some of the other evidences from Godaway port site. There are remains of ancient jetty and some stone anchor recently we found there. And so as a result of this strategic
Amalka? Can you hear me, Amalka? Yes, it seems that Amalka is breaking up, but we'll see. So we have, until Amalka rejoins, I will invite my next speaker, Nishan. Nishan, are you ready?
Of course, yes.
Sure. So it's a great pleasure to introduce my colleague here, Nishan Pereira. So Nishan Pereira is a marine biologist with an interest in coral reef ecology, fisheries, and marine predator area management, with work experience in Sri Lanka and overseas. So he's a co-founder for Blue Resource Trust. We commonly known it as a BRT, a Sri Lankan marine research and conservation organization where he currently heads the coral reef research program. So Nishan is also an underwater photographer, and his work has been featured in several local and international publications. He is also the founder and owner of Island Scuba, a diving industry. So Nishan, I think you are an author for another book, right?
Yes, coral reefs of Sri Lanka.
Yes. Sure. Please tell about that also at your speech, Nishan. So my first question is about the shipwreck biodiversity. So Nishan, tell us, why shipwrecks are biologically or ecologically important for us as a country like Sri Lanka?
Well, basically, when you look at the ocean, we tend to look at it, the ocean as this big place with this amazing biodiversity. But actually, most of that biodiversity is concentrated into small areas around what we call hard substrates or hard bottoms, or where there are structures. Primarily, naturally, these are reefs. So the open oceans, you have some fish, pelagic, what we call pelagic species that are swimming around, but most of the fish, most of the animal life is around these structures. These structures provide kind of habitats that animals can use for shelter. Then of course bigger animals come to feed on them, so it's good for predators as well, and you build up ecosystems and ecosystem communities. So that's where animals tend to thrive. So obviously, like I mentioned, reefs are your natural hard substrates. But similar to reefs, shipwrecks also provide that hard substrate. They provide places for animals to live, they provide shelter, and therefore they're important in serving the role of reefs, particularly in areas where reef development is not so extensive, or in more recent times where reefs are also sometimes degraded due to climate change and human activities. So wrecks kind of provide an alternate habitat for things like corals to grow and fish to congregate. So they provide important habitats for biodiversity, and likewise they're also important for fisheries. Many of the wrecks that we dive or sometimes find for the first time are actually known to local fishermen. Darshana knows this a lot. Some of the work he's done, he's spoken to local fishers to get information about where wrecks are, because they know where the fish are. The fish congregate to these, so they know. So it's important for economic reasons and also for biodiversity.
Yes, Nisha. So, can you tell us about the charismatic species or the special, species you encounter when you dive in shipwrecks, or when you do some sampling or do some assessment in shipwrecks? The very charismatic and very attractive fish species. You can tell us some share about your experience, Nisha.
Yeah, so shipwrecks tend to have similar biodiversity or animal species to reefs in the nearby area. So animals that you would tend to find on reefs in Sri Lanka tend to be similar to what you find on wrecks. But wrecks, so this includes both very small animals, things like nudibranchs, sea slugs, small crabs and shrimps and stuff, all the way to schooling species, and of course large species. In Sri Lanka, actually, shipwrecks tend to seem to be frequented by seasonal whale sharks. So whale sharks are not very common in Sri Lanka, but they seasonally tend to occur, generally between the periods between the monsoons. We call it the inter-monsoon period, when there is more plankton in the water. Whale sharks tend to appear around parts of Sri Lanka. And what we have seen is they tend to aggregate or swim around large structures. So in Sri Lanka, shipwrecks are some of those large structures, and it's often I mean, I wouldn't say it's common, but it's not rare either. It's You will occasionally see these animals like the video you're seeing. This is on a shipwreck of Colombo, and this happens around shipwrecks in other parts of the country as well as also on reefs. Things like big sharks like whale sharks, stingrays or large rays, eagle rays, sometimes turtles. So these are kind of the bigger charismatic animals. And of course, large schools of fish. Here you can see these small fusiliers. They are small schools of fish tend to aggregate around shipwrecks as well. So you have this opportunity to see large schools of fish and sometimes potentially larger animals swim around shipwrecks. And this is not only unique to Sri Lanka. There are many places in the world where these animals congregate. In the two like famous places in the United States, in Florida, they have these what they call Goliath group aggregations on shipwrecks, and in North Carolina in the US they have sand tiger sharks or ragged-toothed tiger sharks, ragged-toothed sharks aggregating around wrecks. So similarly, in Sri Lanka, we have these large schools of fish, and especially large stingrays are quite common around shipwrecks.
Yes. So Nishan, tell us why these animals they come to shipwrecks for what? Why they aggregate around these shipwrecks and just live with them? Can they find some food, or for why they come to that places?
Uh, Mostly for food. So animals like this whale shark that you see here, they will come they eat primarily kind of small fish and planktonic zooplankton, So when you have currents, shipwrecks can cause what we call upwelling, where the currents hit the wreck and kind of get pushed upwards vertically and moving the plankton above the wreck. Now, it's not only about wrecks, it can happen on a reef as well. So anytime the currents hit a large structure. Now, one thing unique in Sri Lanka is that we don't have what they call walls or reef walls that you find, for example, in the Maldives. Sri Lanka's reefs tend to be fairly flat. They're mostly sandstone and limestone platforms, and there are places in the south coast where you have these rock pinnacles. But we don't have a lot of vertical structures in our reefs. They're still interesting to dive, but the formation is different. So you have less upwelling on these. So when you have a big shipwreck, you have upwelling where the plankton aggregates, and then you have, like you saw in that video, all these small fish schooling around these as well. So whale sharks and animals that feed on plankton and small fish will congregate around these places. And of course, when you have structure, there are small fish that hide in it, and this attracts predators. The other important thing or unique thing you will notice with shipwrecks is you tend to have marine life kind of packed into them. You tend to see bigger schools of fish that are more dense around shipwrecks. And the reason for that is because they're smaller than reefs. So on a natural reef, you will have the same amount of fish or even more fish, but the fish tend to be spread out over a large area because the reefs are continuous systems. Whereas a shipwreck is kind of, think about it, and a good analogy is an oasis in the desert, especially when a shipwreck sinks on sand. Shipwrecks sinking further away from a reef tends to have more marine life because suddenly you have this desert of the sand and you have a shipwreck, which is like an oasis where animals can congregate and find shelter. So it's like a magnet for fish. So when you do dive on it, you have all these big schools of fish all in one place because they can't swim around to large areas. So as a diver, they actually provide some of the best marine life experiences in Sri Lanka. To dive, you will see all these, fish, schools of fish all around the country, and as well as some of the wrecks have lots of corals. The older ones, as they get older, more corals tend to grow, and that creates more habitat and diversity as well.
Super. Can we define a shipwreck as a living laboratory, Nisha?
In a way, yes. I mean, it's some of the research I'm doing recently to kind of look at shipwrecks of different ages, to look at how what we call community phase shifts or successions of animal forms. So, when a shipwreck sinks, particularly as I think Darshana mentioned earlier, most shipwrecks in Sri Lanka are natural wrecks, which are unique because they sank from natural causes. They were not artificially sunk. So they're kind of exciting to dive, and there's a story. But one of the potential negatives biologically is a lot of shipwrecks use kind of an anti-fouling coat on them to prevent barnacles and other organisms growing on them when the ship is actually functioning, right? So when a ship sinks, it's not easy for encrusting organisms or larvae of corals to settle on it because of these paints that they use. But over time, these things change, and there are certain types of algae and other organisms that can grow on these. So it takes a time of these things first growing on the shipwreck, and they create an environment on which other things can grow. So sometimes certain types of algae and other organisms grow, then things like corals and things grow on top of those things, and then slowly the ecosystem evolves over time. When we look at a natural reef, it's thousands of years old, and we have missed all those processes of how the reef came to be. Whereas with a shipwreck, we can watch these, and you will see this if you look at a new shipwreck like the Thermopylae Sierra that Darshana was talking about. It has much less coral. If you look at some of the older shipwrecks, now this is another shipwreck that has been in the water for much longer, you can see a lot of corals on it. It almost looks like a reef. Other than the shape of the structure, it looks like a reef. So there are a lot of corals, and then with that, a lot of fish and more diversity.
Yes. So, Nishal, can you tell us about some, particular ships where a person should go and look for, especially for their marine biodiversity? Can you name some ships, Nishal?
I mean, each one is interesting in their own sense. For schools of fish, this picture is from a wreck in Colombo as well called the Chief Dragon. Some of these big wrecks around Colombo are particularly nice for large schools of fish. Some of the wrecks on the east coast around Pasikuda and in that area are also very interesting because they're shallow and they are also quite old, and they have more hard corals. So if you like hard corals and the fish that live around hard corals, like colorful butterfly fish and angelfish, also macro critters like scorpion fish and frogfish, then it's nice to dive on those. If you like big schools of fish, like you see on the visuals here, then these deeper shipwrecks, the bigger shipwrecks are nice on the west coast. And one thing to note also as a biologist, what I will say is the deeper shipwrecks are also acting as a refuge for some of these heavily targeted fish that are fished out. You know, some of the species of groupers and snappers that are targeted by fishing in some areas, they find shelter in wrecks because around shipwrecks, fishermen tend not to put nets because nets get entangled on shipwrecks and they lose their nets. So shipwrecks, people don't like to put put nets around shipwrecks. So actually because of that, things like the schools of fish, you have most fish around the shipwrecks as well. It's kind of a natural protected area.
Thank you, buddy. So this is the questions I am having for the moment, Nishan, but I will have something more later. But Amalka is back again. Amalka, can you hear me?
Yeah, I'm sorry about my poor connection. I'm here again.
Not
Yeah,
at all. You can continue. Or shall I?
Yeah, I was replying to your question. So, what I was talking about the importance of our location, that that location for Sri Lanka to build the trade and cultural relationship between Sri Lanka and other neighboring countries. So, because of that, hundreds of ships landed to Sri Lanka, Thermopylae and Ceylon, right? So, but some of them were not able to return to their motherlands. So that's the main reason. So maybe because of the technical faults, catastrophic events, maybe environmental hazards, and sometimes the Anglo-Dutch War, and again the First World War, Second World War, incidents happen. So because of that, most of the ships were not able to go back to their land. So that's the what I want to emphasize is the location. The strategic location is the main thing, because Sri Lanka is in the middle of Indian Ocean. So that's the answer for your question, Dr. Tony.
Okay, thank you, Amalka. So I know that you are you survey some ships, right? So tell us about, Amalka, what sort of information you extract during your surveys. So what sort of stories these ships tell us? So from your experience and what the work you have done so far, tell us so the information you extract from these ships and some interesting stories you have prepared to share with us, Amalka.
Yeah, if you can share the screen, Mr. Aslam. Yeah, Dr. Tony, the shipwreck itself is we call it time capsule. Can you share the screen, Aslam? My slides. So it's a time capsule. Whatever the activity is happening, so it's with the ship sank, it's deposited on the bottom of the seabed. So archaeologically, that's very important. In land archaeology, we have been excavating through the ground. We have cultural sequence. We have to study stratigraphy. But when we come to underwater excavation, underwater archaeology, so we have only one context. We call one, because all of us have seen Titanic movie. So within 2-3 hours, everything embedded in the sea. So all the things happening during that time, it's landing the seabed. So that in archaeological sense is easy for us to study because only one event happened at that time. So when we excavate after 100 years, after 200 years, we can easily interpret the data, interpret the artifacts what we expose. So these slides to show you the Godaway shipwreck excavation. So this is how we lay out our grids and all. Then we are exposing after this is after exposing. You can see number of artifacts exposed already. Then next slide. So archaeologically, we have to document each and everything. So that's one of the principles we proceed, and then only we can raise the artifact. If I can show you that we have excavated from Godaway the number of ceramics, the big storages, jars to small wares, and stone artifacts like grinding stones, stone benches, the Mueller stones, like then this is again, if you can remember, I showed one necklace from Ibankatu burial excavations. So the similar material of carnelian beads we found from Godaway shipwreck. That's the important thing because these are foreign material. I told you already. So we don't come across this material from Sri Lanka. And the glaze ingots. These are the raw material for making glass implements. So like that, there are a number of iron implements, spearheads, and other metal artifacts we exposed. So this is a replica. You can see this in the Trincomalee Museum, Maritime and Naval History Museum in Trincomalee. So far we have no idea about the provenance of Godaway shipwreck because the artifacts we exposed already are in our labs and we are still working on them. So we can't make a final conclusion on that. So apart from that, in Galle Harbour project, so Galle Harbour is to show you the map. There are a number of sites have been revealed from Department of Archaeology and the Central Cultural Fund. This is one of the famous shipwreck, Hercules. It's in Galle Harbour. There's a bell. Then, interestingly, inside Galle Harbour, they have in 1996 they have found these two stone anchors. You can see these wooden parts, this long anchor. These been dated to 13th century AD. So very interesting to say. Then this is a monster from again Galle Harbour. It's also one of the leading excavations we had in Sri Lanka. It goes back to 16. In fact, it's a British shipwreck ship. But finally, after Anglo-Dutch War, the Dutch people they attacked to them and they were occupied this monster, and it is in the Galle Harbour. So these are some of the. This is the grid layout of the excavations and the artifacts you can see. And Rangoon is also one of the main shipwreck we have in outer harbour of Galle, and SS Malabar. There are other number of shipwrecks in Galle Harbour. This is SS Indus. This is also interesting shipwreck. This is in the eastern coast, northeastern coast. So she ran aground in 1885 with the valuable cargo of Barut and Sanchi sculptures. You know, the first archaeological commissioner to India, British archaeological commissioner called Alexander Cunningham. With his collection, he wanted to take all the treasure to the London Museum. So while sailing via Colombo in Mullatiu area, everything sank. So we are trying to, especially Mr. Chandratna, Mr. Rasika, I should mention their names from Central Cultural Fund, along with the Department of Archaeology. We are trying to excavate this. You can see the excavation in progress here with using some equipments. And again, the Swami Rock, Koneshwaram in Trincomalee. It's also one of the archaeologically important diving site in Sri Lanka. It says that during Portuguese time they demolished this temple and they dumped all the carvings and everything to the sea. So today you can see some of things, but there are still some new sculptures as well, because there's a custom in this area when the Hindu temples, when they are renovating, they used to remove all the previous sculptures. So they used to dump over here. So, and it's one of the wonderful culturally and archaeologically valuable site in Sri Lanka. And great buses and little buses again, we can especially Sir Arthur C. Clarke, he and his colleagues, initially they discovered these sites, the silver coin wreck and the bottle wreck, copper wreck, like famous wrecks available. Is wonderful. You can see the good crystal clear water. It's a good diving site, but hardly you can dive in very few days in the year. And finally, these works, the archaeological works, that we have to go to the public. We have to disseminate that knowledge. What we are excavating, everything should go to the public finally. So you have few museums in Sri Lanka. So one of them, but especially for maritime archaeology and underwater archaeology, you have one museum called Maritime Archaeology Museum in Galle, and the other one, the Maritime and Naval History Museum in Trincomalee. Apart from that, there are a number of shipwrecks, in southern coast, especially SS Conch, the Earl of Shaftesbury, the wonderful diving sites, which has archaeological and historical valuable sites. And there are a number of sites, I think, if you go to his book and his website, you will get lots of information about that. So since the time is not that permitting, I will end with this.
Yeah, thank you, Amaka. So one last question. I know that you are pioneered in marine archaeological impact assessments, right? But we know about environmental impact assessment. So briefly tell us about, Amaka, what is an archaeological impact assessment and why we do that? The need for archaeological impact assessments.
Yeah, Sri Lanka like country, we have wherever we dig, we find some archaeological findings, materials. So because of that, especially in 1998, in Archaeological Act, they had one statement about that archaeological impact assessment. Prior to any archaeological, any development project, the project proponent have to do archaeological impact assessment to mitigate and to then he has to donate money if we want to excavate any site after discover any site from that project area. If we come to this topic, this underwater, the port city, Colombo port city, and especially when Sri Lankan fisheries department or fisheries ministry, when they want to build new fisheries harbors, wherever they want to build, prior to that we have done, especially archaeology department and Central Cultural Fund, they have done archaeological impact assessment. Even in port city, as example, we found a few archaeological important sites under port city area. We found one cannon, so it goes back to British period, and one barge, a part of a barge. So those things we could reveal, and we gave our report to the authorities, and finally, without doing any harm to that, we could initiate those projects. So that's the importance of archaeological impact assessment.
Yeah, thank you, Amaka. And with that, all my questions are over now. So now I open the floor for these questions I got from the audience. So I got some questions over my WhatsApp. So the first question, I think maybe Darshana or Nishan, right? This is a question for you guys. While we are having all these treasures, why do we create underwater museums here and there? Do we see any purpose of this? I will start with Darshana first.
Yes, yes. So I think that question may have two answers. So the first answer is that we do have a lot of underwater heritage already, and we do have underwater assets like shipwrecks and reefs. So I think the first thing we need to really do as a country is to protect what we have, right? So that's an important aspect of it. So I think when it comes to underwater museums, it may have some sort of usefulness. I think it creates more dive sites for all these underwater museums we have created is quite shallow. So, so the fact that they are very accessible, they are close by, and when you create an underwater museum in an area that doesn't have much dive sites, it can actually be really great for the local economy. So I think it does have some value if the location and the depth is carefully selected. It may provide value to the economy of the country.
Sure. Nishan, do you have something to add to that?
Not much. I think I agree with Darshana. I mean, the word museum, I think, is not really the most accurate way to describe these sites. They're more like underwater galleries or attractions. But I agree with Darshana. They can be useful in specific locations to increase the diversity of diving opportunities in a specific location. Like you pointed out, we have a lot of wrecks and reefs, but you don't get them in every place. So for a place where they may not have, you add another dive site, and like you said, you can create something useful for inexperienced beginner divers to experience marine life as well. So they can be useful in the right location.
Super. So again, I move to Darshana. Darshana, can you just tell about some very expeditious or some very adventurous shipwrecks you can tell us? Some are very shallow. It's good that we can see some biodiversity. We can enjoy the shipwreck, but some deeper and very challenging wrecks you have come across and you have already conquered them, Darshana?
Yeah, I think the first thing that came into my mind is the World War I wrecks. And again, as Nishan said, all shipwrecks, the people who actually know where they are the fishermen, right? Because they day in day out they go out. So because of the fishermen, we find these wrecks. And I think one of my favorite projects is the World War I shipwreck project. When I was starting to dive these deep shipwrecks, I had no idea that they were World War I projects. And the Worcestershire is actually located about 15 kilometers southwest of Colombo, and it's one of the deepest wrecks in Sri Lanka. It's deeper than the Hermes. It's the third deepest wreck so far. And so exploring deep wrecks is quite challenging because you need more air, spend more time. There's a situation called decompression that we have to go through. But it's also extremely exciting and it's quite addictive. So I think that time period, number of years I spent exploring the Worcestershire, and along with that, is also World War I wreck. So I think as far as Sri Lanka is concerned, that the two World War I wrecks are identified and pretty well documented, and also the bells have been recovered, and the bells are with the Maritime Archaeological. So we do have a rich legacy around World War wrecks and also the deep wrecks, which are good for technical divers. So what I think happens is that divers, as they dive, they want to challenge themselves more, right? So they go into this area of diving called technical diving, which is to go a little bit more deeper. And so the shipwrecks in Sri Lanka, the deep shipwrecks like Worcestershire, the Hermes, and then there's another one called Trikala in Beruala, 65 meters. Those provide challenge for those who want to go deeper.
Super. Right. I think I have another question for, Amalka will answer. Amalka, do we have, have they found any old shipwrecks around Godaway harbor? And if so, from which country these ships have sailed from? The second question is that from the same participant. Tell us about the oldest shipwreck that they have, that maybe you have found in Sri Lankan waters.
Yeah, for both questions I can give. Yeah, both questions I can give one answer. There are two shipwrecks. Mainly one is iron shipwreck. The other one that I already showed some pictures as a wooden shipwreck. So shipwreck we have those wooden samples we have sent for carbon datings, and it came 2nd century BC. So far that's the oldest shipwreck in the Indian Ocean. In the world, in Turkey there's a shipwreck called Uluburun. So that is one. It goes back to 12th century 12 or 3rd century BC. But Godaway shipwreck, Godaway wooden shipwreck, goes back to 2nd century BC. So that's the oldest one. And still we have been working on that. We missed 2 seasons because of this pandemic situation. I think to finish it very soon and open it to the public for recreational divers. So that's the oldest and in the Indian Ocean.
Right. So, and another question from my side. So maybe Darshana can start, but Nishan can follow it up. The question is that how can we use these shipwrecks in Sri Lanka to promote tourism? Actually, have we really explored this potential to the maximum, or still where we are? What we can do actually to promote tourism using these hidden treasures?
It's a very good question, and I think we have started looking into it as a national asset that we can promote tourism to, but we have a long, long way to go compared to countries like Malaysia, Indonesia, Thailand, and even Maldives. And again, those countries, their best assets are reefs, right? So we have a strength in shipwrecks. But those countries have developed multi-million-dollar diving industries over the years, and hundreds and thousands of divers go there each year just to dive, just to dive. So we have a huge potential with our shipwrecks. Obviously, we have to do two things. One is to protect our assets. We can't market shipwrecks for tourism at the same time we are letting them being destroyed, right? So that's one important thing. We need to protect our tourism assets. Second thing is obviously market them around the world so that divers who are really interested in exploration and diving very interesting dive sites with a lot of historical legacy come to Sri Lanka. And I already brought out the example of HMS Hermes. It's already up there. Technical divers from all over the world, they just come to Sri Lanka to dive the Hermes. They don't go anywhere else. They come to the airport, they go to Batiklo, they spend 2 weeks, they dive the Hermes every day because it's such a big shipwreck. There's so much history, it's so exciting to do, and they go back, right? So that's the type of diving, and I call them the lifestyle divers. So they are these type of people. Everything revolves around diving. Their vacations revolve around diving. Their discussions, their friends, social groups revolve around diving, and they are also quite well off in their job, so they can spend money on diving. So we have a huge segment of I think revenue which we can get from shipwrecks if we market this asset correctly.
Super. Nishan, something for you.
Yeah, I mean, the dive industry as a whole, Tony, you have two types of divers. The ones that, like Darshana mentioned, so which are the most serious lifestyle divers, and then you have the general recreational divers. Now, the general recreational divers are people who may not travel purely as for diving. They are people who will add on diving to a holiday, and Sri Lanka primarily has been a destination like that for scuba diving. Our major attractions have been topside, even if it's marine and coastal, like the beaches and all the other things. And while they're at the coastal resorts, people will engage in a little bit of diving, a couple of days of diving perhaps, or learn to dive and do a course. The other group historically hasn't been a big market in Sri Lanka, but we have to keep in mind that the dive industry is relatively young. Diving itself is very old in Sri Lanka. We've had a lot of regional pioneering divers and explorers in Sri Lanka, but the recreational tourism dive industry is quite young in Sri Lanka. We've had some unfortunate reasons of the past of conflicts and things that have affected tourism and closed up parts of the country. So the industry is still young and growing. So we haven't really tapped that potential. But like Darshana mentioned for the Hermes, it is there. While mainstream tourists may not be aware, within the specific dive circles of lifestyle divers, Sri Lanka is gaining has a growing reputation as a destination for good wreck diving in the region. The Hermes is for sure the most famous of our wrecks, but there are other wrecks that are dived by tourists, and myself, having been involved in the dive industry for some time now, I know that we have people who come to Sri Lanka and spend a week just diving, and sometimes that's their primary reason. They come and spend 7 to 10 days in Sri Lanka diving, and maybe add on. There they do it the other way. So they add on a trip to Kandy or to Golf Port or to the Godaway or something as an add-on to their diving holiday. And in my experience in the dive industry, that market is there in Sri Lanka already. It's not a new market. It's small, but it is there. So it's not something that we have to create newly. It's already there. It's how we expand that and marketing. And it's important that Sri Lanka also in the dive industry identifies its niche, because we have to understand what we have that makes Sri Lanka a unique dive destination. Now, we do have nice reefs. As a biologist, I dive on reefs and study corals a lot, but our reefs are not comparable to, say, parts of Indonesia or even the Maldives or places like that. They're interesting diving, but for shipwreck diving, as both Darshan and Amal have pointed out, for all these reasons, we are a very unique destination. So that is kind of our niche market, and that is where all the lifestyle divers who come to Sri Lanka come for that reason generally, and that's where I see the growth potential for Sri Lanka in the future as well for diving.
Yeah, thank you, Nishan. So I have one last question, especially for Darshana and Nishan. So, what kind of mechanisms need to be adapted for the conservation and sustainable use of shipwrecks around Sri Lanka? So, I think Darshana will start that. What kind of mechanisms needed to be adapted for the conservation and sustainable use of shipwrecks around Sri Lanka?
Yeah, I think that's a very complex question, to be honest. But I think I will just answer very briefly and then give it to Nishan because the time is also out. I think the first thing we need to really do is to recognize that we have an asset in shipwrecks, and then ensure that we protect them from various environmental threats and man-made threats, pollution, illegal salvage, dynamite fishing, etc. So I think for me that's the first step. First, protect our assets, especially for marketing, and I think I will hand it over to Nishan to just continue the answer there.
I think the add-on to that would be a layer of working with the dive industry then to look at identifying these top-end dive sites and develop both a marketing and management plan for users. So this could be establishing moorings or regulations on access to that, but not to over-regulate it and make it difficult, but ensuring that the industry itself can then reap the benefits. Because in terms of marketing and all of that, the best vehicle is the industry itself. The dive industry, dive shops usually tend to have their contacts, and they will tend to support this, and together with relevant government agencies, you can support the management and revenue generation. Once you have revenue generation, income generation, then there's an incentive for people to manage it better or to look after it, and for the local community to value it in a different way, and not just as a fishing ground as in some places they are now. Already in Sri Lanka, sites that are dived more heavily tend to have less problems, but then the wrecks that we don't know of are the ones that have problems. So having that growth along with good management helps. And of course there's another aspect of shipwrecks which Amalka is in charge of, or used to be with the department, is more the historical shipwrecks, some of which are not accessible recreationally, but it's a completely different thing of archaeological conservation.
Thank you, Nishan. So it's almost 3 minutes past 5. So our time is almost over. But before we wrap up, let me start with Darshana. So Darshana, we know that you are an experienced diver with with the experience of several years and throughout the country, and again even cave dives and even for the region. So with this experience and the knowledge you got through this time, what's your last message to our audience regarding the wreck diving, and what sort of invitation you can give to our audience? So your final word to the audience, Darshana.
Yeah, thank you, Tony. So that's a great question again, and I think what I would like to tell everyone in Sri Lanka is that we live in an island nation. We should not only explore inland, we should look around in the ocean as well, and then step into the ocean. And then it's a completely different world out there, and it will open up completely new differences, different experience that can actually change your life. So my invitation is come to the ocean.
Yeah, very simple, short. Nishan, so from your marine ecological biological perspective, so what's the message to our audience today?
I think reiterating the importance that shipwrecks play as ecosystems, of course, from a biological point, as someone who lives in Colombo primarily, and as Darshana himself showed on the map, Colombo, a lot of people are not aware that how much shipwreck diving there is around Colombo, where Colombo is not very well known for its reefs, but there is this plethora of wrecks, and all the marine life. That footage you saw on the videos is actually from Colombo, from whale sharks to other sharks to stingrays. So there is extensive stuff to be discovered, but not only in Colombo, but all around Sri Lanka. What I'm trying to re-emphasize is there is more to the oceans than meets the eye. There is a lot more to our oceans than a couple of places that are already well known. There's a lot more if you're willing to explore. And to anyone out there who's tuning in today from outside Sri Lanka, who plans to visit Sri Lanka at any point in the future, do go out and check out the diving around shipwrecks in Sri Lanka. There is some amazing diving, both from a historical point as well as from just pure fun diving in terms of exploring these big wrecks and seeing schools of fish. Come with an open mind and experience it. The dive industry may not be as well developed as it is in the Maldives, but if you come with an open mind and you're willing to explore a little bit, you will be rewarded with some fantastic dive sites. And as a diver, the biggest advantage is our dive sites are not crowded. Currently, because it's not so famous, you're potentially going to have the dive sites to just a few people, so you can have a really good time.
Sure. Yes, Amal, from archaeological point of view, yes, what's your message to our audience?
Yes, Tony. As I mentioned earlier, shipwrecks, underwater cultural heritage is most important part to rebuild our history. Not only our history as an island, to fill the gaps of the regional history, Indian Ocean history. So most of the data beneath the sea, very few data we can reveal from the land excavations and all. So because of that, so far we have discovered only very few in numbers, but we need to work on more. But before archaeological divers, before archaeologists reach there, most of the treasure hunters have done lots of things underwater. So what I want to tell, experience, as Darshan and Nishan said, experience it, enjoy it, but take only photographs and take only leave only memories. Don't pick anything, because I showed you one slide. We have to document each and everything before raised into the surface. So, but in the most of the historical and archaeological valuable shipwrecks in Sri Lanka, the treasure hunters have done lots of things. So please take only photographs. That's my final. But I invite all the divers from all over the world, because we have marvelous underwater treasure, the cultural heritage in Sri Lankan waters. So please come, take only photographs. Thank you.
Thank you all. And with that, I must mention that it's a great privilege for me to meet all my dive buddies again in this forum, not in the sea, but in a virtual forum. So I know that we explored for some extent, but still there are a lot to be explored. As I mentioned you earlier, in marine environment, unknown is known, but still we are here to support you, but we are still inviting you to come to Sri Lanka and explore our reefs and explore especially the wrecks, starting from shallow waters to deeper waters, and enjoy the life there, the heritage we preserve there. At the same time, the real biodiversity hidden in these underwater treasures. So the world is open. So we are here to provide that platform to all the people who are really want to jump into these treasures. And therefore, we again invite all of you to come and let's explore these deep, precious, and very colorful underwater treasures. So with that, I must thank all the participants, at the same time the organizers for organizing this event, and again the help desk for all the logistical arrangements, and again especially again for these three eminent speakers, Darshana Jayawardena, Amanki Vijayasuriya, and Nishan Pereira. So with that, I conclude this session. We hope that we will be meeting again in another session that will definitely go deep into waters and explore more into our hidden treasures. And until such time, I say goodbye and I say a nice evening for you. And I hope to see you soon in the same virtual platform. And not only virtual platform, someday in real Sri Lankan underwater exploring environment. Thank you and good evening from Colombo.
Thank you.